Hello, people. My name is Lee Cole, and this is James Proctor, and this is our podcast. Welcome to it. James, how are you doing today?
Hey Lee, I'm doing well. Happy 4th.
Thank you. Happy 4th of July to everybody watching this. And we are going to talk about probably the biggest mob rat ever, the most ruthless, one of the most ruthless guys I've ever read about, a guy that was a pure killer, a guy that determined who won the war in the Colombo War when they went to when it was Alley Boy going to war against Arena.
Yep.
Um, Whoever had Scarpa was going to win that war. Would you say that's pretty accurate, James?
Yeah, so Greg Scarpa, was really led all the forces that and men that was on the Persico faction, and then the Arena faction is mostly through Wild Bill Cthulhu. But as we'll talk about in this show, Scarpa had some intelligence, let's say,
Yep.
that gave him an advantage.
Yep. Well, and that's what we're going to talk about. But first of all, where was Scarpa born? Where did how did he rise to power?
Yeah, so he was born in 1928, and so he is raised in Bensonhurst, like a lot of the mob guys, and so his family really wasn't involved in the mafia except for an older brother, Salvatore, and so Salvatore was part of the Profaxi family, which we know later becomes the Colombo family, and so anyway, Greg Scarpa Sr. got made it in 1956 before the books closed, and then the early 60s became a capo in the for the Profaxi family, and so he was able to gain some power pretty fast through being ruthless and also the ability to make money.
And he also had some other advantages that we're going to talk about. But would you say that Scarpa rose for a guy of his age? He rose quick. He was made young. And he got high rank young. Uh, and isn't it weird that altogether, in 40 years of being a ruthless killer on the street, he spent exactly 1 year. That year he was dying at the end of his
Hmm.
life. And besides that, 1 week in prison.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Because we always hear about you either going to die in prison, which he did, but usually they say you're going to spend decades in prison, or you're going to uh, die on the street. And he was able to stay off out of prison most of his life, and was able to pretty much have a free reign to do whatever he wanted on the street.
And he was a paid informant for many, many years, wasn't he?
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to I find interesting about this. So when I was looking at this, there's really, when you say there's two different types of informants, and so we've always talked about Mikey Scars, Sammy Gravano, Valachi, those folks, and those are cooperating witnesses. So basically, people that never cooperate until that we know of until they get picked up, and it's a way for them to reduce their sentence. But then Scarpa was the second type of informant, which I think is even a worse rat, and this is the confidential informant, and so
And,
that's a
and what's the
sorry.
name? Isn't there a name like High Echelon, something like that?
Yeah, yeah. So in the FBI, the highest value to these confidential informants are part of the top echelon informant program. And I know of two of them that were part of it, at least during this time frame. Greg Scarpa Sr., and then which he was an informant about 30 years, and then you had Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, and he was working with the feds for 10 years.
Right. So let's read this. This is a memorandum that was sent in the 60s. This is what it says. This is June 6, 1962 until the 7th of 62. This
Mm,
informant is not paid on a regular scale, but is paid on a cash COD basis. The informant had been paid on SAC authority to compliance with Section 108J2, Manual of Instruction, Authority Assistant Director C.A. Evans. Basically, what this is being sent up to J. Edgar Hoover
Mhm.
to pay Scarpa for giving some evidence, ain't it? And this is
Yeah.
starting in the early 60s.
Yeah, so he got started like it's in 62 because he had gotten picked up for a robbery. And so when the feds were talking to him, he said basically he for some reason he did not want to be in prison. He just said that he wasn't going to spend his life in prison, and so he wanted to see what could be worked out. And so the feds figured out one, they were looking for, this just a couple of years before that, Valachi had done his testimony and everything, but he wasn't a confidential informant. He was, again, one of those that was a cooperating witness. And so Scarpa was able to substantiate a lot of what Valachi said, but actually it also proved that Valachi wasn't as valuable as the FBI had first thought. And so Scarpa provided just a wealth of information they didn't have on all five families, and it was up to date everything about what was going on in New York with the five families.
And they even kind of used him in a civil rights man of the FBI, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, and so so what was interesting about Scarpa, besides the situation with where he was providing information, he was brought in as well to do black bag operations, and so yeah, he went down to Mississippi,
And let me
and
read that. I'll pick that part up. So he goes down to Mississippi. Whoops. Let me see. Well, think I got the wrong thing here.
yeah,
Okay. Let me pick this up.
yeah, so it's interesting, and that's like in the summer of '64 is where we'll be um, going forward to talk about this.
Okay, you can keep on talking.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, basically, what had happened was that in the
Well,
summers, you got
I'm
it.
sorry. Let me pick up the article. Running out of options, J. Edgar Hoover at that time turned to Gregory Scarpa for assistance in the infamous Mississippi burning murder case. That was a movie with Gene Hackman, a very popular movie about the
Yes.
three kids that were killed, the three freedom fighters that were killed and their bodies disappeared. And in 1964, the Ku Klux Klan, riding high on a string of murders, killed three civil rights workers. The Klan buried the bodies in a dam near Philadelphia, Mississippi, sparking a nationwide manhunt. The FBI, running out of options, recruited a known mafia enforcer named Gregory Scarpa to intimidate the Klansmen into revealing the location. It worked. Scarpa, nicknamed the Grim Reaper, often bragged about his part in over 20 killings, though it is suspected he had part in 80 killings. He had served as Brooklyn's Colombo crime family for over 10 years as a capo up to this point. He made good money, and the rumor was he was routinely carrying $5,000 cash around on him to bribe people. In 1964, just 2 years after beginning his informant career, Scarpa played what is arguably the most important role for the FBI. The KKK had recently murdered three men, and James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schorner, and had traveled to Mississippi as part of the Freedom Summer campaign. And those were so basically what he did is he went down there, kidnapped a Klan member who ran a store there, put a knife and threatened to cut his penis off.
Right.
This guy was considered a tough guy. He was a big old boy, and Scarpa got him in a matter of minutes to tell him where the bodies were, didn't he?
Yeah, he was, and so yeah, the guy's named Lawrence Byrd, and so yeah, and so one of the things was Scarpa could use illegal interrogation techniques that the agents couldn't do. And so, again, this was black bag, and he was able to successfully do that. And so, he pistol whipped the guy, he stuck a gun barrel down his throat as well. So he wasn't playing around, and Bird revealed to Scarpa the location of the three bodies.
He went back, collected his wife, and collected the money, and left town.
Yeah.
And just like that, they solved the murder. You don't see that in the movie. There's a lot of people that say it's not true because the daughter wrote it in her book, but there's no evidence that it's not true.
Yeah, exactly. And we have, all of the documentation. The FBI has released, 1,200 pages of documents that we've been shifting through.
Okay, so Scarpa comes back, right? Okay, so say after this he comes back and he remains working with the FBI for several years, and then it's he stopped working for them for a couple of years, didn't he?
Yeah, so part of it was that his main handler was Villano, and so as we a part of it too was he actually what was interesting was he actually Scarpa had actually helped the FBI a second time there in Mississippi. There was a guy named Vernon Dahmer that had it was horrible, got killed in a fire that the Klan had set, and anyway he had helped the FBI in that case, but wasn't as well known. But anyway, Villano. Retired in '73, and so the folks were at the FBI, didn't know really how to deal with Scarpa, and so there's a lot of change going on at the FBI. So in '75, Scarpa got kicked off because of payment. He didn't get paid what he thought he was supposed to, and he said he's going to stop working for him, and then the FBI said, "Yeah, we don't want to deal with this guy anymore."
Okay, so eventually this guy DeVecchio,
Yes,
uh, he reads about Scarpa through some stuff at the FBI and decides that Scarpa sounds valuable, and he basically goes to Scarpa's house. He tries to contact him. He's having no luck, so he goes to Scarpa's house, doesn't he?
yeah, he goes to his house and you know, uh, talk to him, and is able to convince him to give it another chance, and they were able to get along really well because this guy DeVecchio was known for being a little bit streetwise for an FBI agent.
But DeVecchio ran into a problem. He started developing a friendship. He kind of worshipped. If you look at anything he did, he kind of started worshiping Scarpa. Something like uh, he worshipped Scarpa like Whitey Bulger was worshipped uh, in that situation.
Yeah, because he was basically was he became a simp. He became obviously he not able to be objective. He DeVecchio just allowed the charm because Scarpa could be charming, and that's what he was. He could be charming one minute and then kill you the next. And so DeVecchio fell for it, and so Scarpa was the one that had control in that relationship for 12 years.
And during this time, Scarpa was doing a Scarpa was doing a lot of evil things. One, let's talk about Mary Berry.
Mm. Yeah, and so in this case, it's a very sad situation. So this was a girl associated with Alley Boy Persico, and so the feds were looking at um, the commission trial and looking at convicting these mobsters. And so anyway, they set it up where Mary she needed a job, and so she came to the Wimpy Boys Social Club, which was Scarpa's
And this
social
was
club.
and this was in September of 1984.
Yep, September 1984, and that was when the commission trials were going on, and so there was the thought that she might be an informant, and Scarpa had allegedly got some information from DeVecchio that made him think that she might have been an informant, but
And
she
also,
wasn't.
Ollie Boy ordered the killing of her.
Yes, that's what happened.
A beautiful woman, her whole life ahead of her, a young girl, a 31-year-old woman. And so when she got there, he pushed her to the ground and executed her, didn't he?
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, killed her with a gun.
Okay, and that was it with Mary Berry, and little things like that, because the family swears to this day that she was set up by DeVecchio. DeVecchio gave Scarpa the information that this girl may, and it turned out years later that she was not an informant at all.
No, she just was looking for a job, and she happened to be friends with Persico, and she thought she could you get a job. And there's been some interviews and discussions with her family, and it's just they've been devastated by what happened in '84.
And there was a war going at the time. Persico was in hiding at that time when he murdered her and got her to
Yeah.
meet him. And they found her body on McDonald's Avenue near Bay Parkway in Brooklyn, and it was wrapped up. And the good thing is at least they found her body.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only positive about it, that the family at least, knew what had happened to her, and, they did recover her body. But yeah, just a horrible situation.
Okay, so that's one thing. Now let's move on. So his brother gets killed too. Is that correct?
Yeah, in '87, his brother Salvatore gets murdered.
Okay, and I guess he just accepted the murder. I mean, it was part of the.
Yeah, it was in, and there's not a lot of detail about it. It was interesting because he was in there longer than, at this time, he was in there longer than his younger brother Greg. But something happened, and he was taken out in 1987, and so, but it doesn't seem like anything that we could see that changed or affected Greg Scarpa Sr. at all.
And then this is right here. What is this right here?
Yeah, so that's the social club, the Wimpy Boys Social Club. And so the one on the left is what you would back in the '70s, and then on the right is where it is today. And so just kind of a showing then and now.
Okay, and okay, so this is where his crew basically hang out at the Wimpy Boys Club with his.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so now, but here's the thing though. Scarpa got sick during this time too, and
Yeah.
when you find out how he got sick, it was really kind of his own fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
he got sick. He got sick and he needed a transfusion. He had a bleeding ulcer and he
Hmm.
needed blood transfusion. So he did not want to use any of the blood at the hospital because it was a hospital that had a lot of black people going to it, and Puerto Rican and Spanish people.
Yes, it
And
was.
Greg Scarpa was a very racist man. He didn't want any of that blood in them.
Right.
So he called his boys to come down and donate blood. But one of the people that donated blood was a weightlifter who would
Hmm.
he would be dead 2 months later of AIDS.
Yes.
So
Yep, and this guy, his name was Paul Melee, and so he was, like I said, was a bodybuilder, but he was using the anabolic steroids, the stuff that
right.
you injectables, and so yeah, he had gotten HIV from a dirty needle, and so back in '86, there wasn't the what do you call it, like the screening in a blood like there is today. And so yeah, he ended up getting Scarpa ended up getting HIV from it. And part of it too was, like you said, that he didn't want any of the blood from the blood bank. And if he had done that, it might have been a different story. I don't know, but it's just very strange that it was based on racism, like you
Yeah,
said.
yeah, yeah. And he was trying to protect himself from bad blood. I guess he
Yeah,
didn't do a good job.
right.
So the thing is here too that so here he is, he's on the street, and then the war breaks out between Arena and between Alley Boy, between the Persicos. And let's face it, he was the difference in the war.
He
And
was. He was.
he always, besides being a maniac, he was always one step ahead. Why do you think he always was one step ahead of everybody?
Yeah, I mean, he one. I mean, he played. He was known as very Machiavellian. He knew how to. He played chess a lot of times when others played checkers. But again, he was getting information from DeVecchio that was helping to, uh, like, disclose locations of the arena faction. And so that was giving him an unfair advantage. And so they were meeting every during this war. They're actually meeting about every week to 10 days, talking about Scarpa and DeVecchio.
And he had a shootout with Joe Waverly and shot Joe Waverly in the stomach.
Hmm.
And after Joe Waverly was rushed to the hospital, uh, DeVecchio punched and said, "Yes, we're winning." And there were some agents there that took that the wrong way. It was like they said they thought he was too involved, and he was rooting for one side over the other side, where he was supposed to just be bringing in intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then what's interesting to me during this war. The war was in like 90, 91, 92, and so Scarpa got HIV in '86, and if you remember, they were saying, oh, he would be dead in 6 months. He ended up living 6, 7 years.
Yeah,
Just
he was.
I
He
mean,
was.
that guy couldn't die, and he got shot in the eye one
Well,
time.
that's after the war.
Yeah,
Okay,
after the
that's
war, but
that's
I'm
something
just saying
separate.
this guy would not die.
Yeah, yeah. So during the war now, he was about to kill Bill Gatula, Wild Bill. He knew Wild Bill was. He was sitting on the house that Wild Bill was with his girlfriend.
Hmm.
But at the last minute, he called it off because the agent asked him to call it off.
Yes,
Supposedly,
right.
explain that.
Yeah, and so what had happened was that there was a situation where Scarpa had gotten basically shot at. So this was in '91. So they had attempted to kill him. There was a van that ran from vehicles with guns drawn. They converged on Scarpa's car, but then Scarpa was able to drive away from the ambush. So
But he was
now,
pissed because the daughter was with him and the
yeah,
baby.
his 8-month-old grandson Linda was with him. His 22-year-old daughter Linda. It was horrible, and so and then he got blocked in by two cars, and so but yeah, Scarpa was able to escape, and his relatives were too. But anyway, the license plate information,
He got
there
from the
was
feds.
a guy from the feds because the plate actually fell off the truck, and so they traced it back to a rental office in Queens, and let me introduce a new guy in this, Agent Christopher Favo. And
Right.
so he worked for DeVecchio. And so he gave this plate to DeVecchio. And he didn't suspect that DeVecchio had anything. He knew DeVecchio was working with Scarpa, but had no clue that he was leaking information. And so, anyway, someone had told Scarpa, which had to have been DeVecchio, where the truck had been rented. And Scarpa realized that the gunman had been sent by Wild Bill Catullo.
So at this point, he wants to kill Wild Bill in the worst way.
Yeah, exactly. And the way he was going to do it was kind of unique. So his plan was to disguise himself as a Hasidic Jew, and then basically run him down as he left his girlfriend's house on Thanksgiving Day of '91. But then, what's interesting, in the morning that was going to happen as well, there was an article in the Post that mentioned that Scarpa was a snitch, and so he was forced to call off the hit because he needed to talk with his people. He wanted to let them know it wasn't true. And so, yeah, it was just a very weird situation. But then what Scarpa had to do in order to prevent his people from realizing that he actually killed two other people and wounded a third that was in the other faction. So yeah, I mean, there was rumors for a few weeks that yeah, Scarpa was working with the feds, but then he was able to
Well,
get out of it.
he fooled them because people around him were saying, well, if he was working with the feds, he wouldn't be allowed to kill people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's what happened. So, but basically, though, I mean, what we're seeing is that he was had a license to kill. You
Okay,
know,
now let's get to another story. So how does Larry Mazza come into this?
Yeah, so Larry Mazza was, and there's a lot of different stories about this, but what we can confirm is that that he was working. He is like 18 years old. He was doing stuff for the family, more of a handyman or whatever.
Oh,
And
he was handy, all right.
yeah, and Linda,
He was hands on.
right, and so Linda, drew a liking to him, and apparently Scarpa was willing to accept it. I don't know at what point he found out, but the stories we hear is that he eventually finds out, and then he's accepting of it. And we know Scarpa had other girlfriends. We knew he had a He had like three families, and he had a family in Las Vegas, and then had his with Linda, and then he had several women. But for whatever reason, if we believe what Larry Mazza said, that he allowed that relationship to go on with Linda and him.
And eventually, so he's being protected, but it gets to the point where DeVecchio can no longer protect him because he's having now people are complaining to the borough about him. Explain that when they go to the FBI and his co-workers are complaining.
Yeah, so what they start to see, especially with Agent Chris Favo, he begins to suspect that DeVecchio is dirty. There's just a lot of these which is more than coincidences, that it just doesn't make sense how it seems like Scarpa's aware of everything that's going on, and so information that shouldn't have been given was, that the only person that could have given it was DeVecchio. And so he ends up becoming a whistleblower and goes into the feds, and says that, hey, this guy's dirty.
And so, whose side did the FBI take?
Well, and that's what's bad, is they took DeVecchio's side,
and
and
what did they do to the other guy, the whistleblower?
yeah, they end up sending him to um, the mid part of the U.S. I mean, they just basically removed him, and then DeVecchio. It was strange. They didn't even he didn't have to take a lie detector test. Normally, when there's these investigations, especially as an agent, you're supposed to go through a lie detector test. He didn't do it. He was not cooperative. He was very dismissive of Chris Favo, saying that the guy didn't know what he was talking about, that he was just a bookworm, just basically trying to say that you have to be a certain way if you want to get information from informants. But
And you have this guy right here too that was a legend in the FBI.
he was.
He was involved with a lot of mob arrests. He brought down a lot of mobsters, and eventually he retires.
Hmm.
And after he retires, they eventually charge him with murder, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So they charge him with 4 counts of murder, and by this point, when they finally do that, Greg Scarpa Sr. had already died. He died in '94 as a prisoner in Rochester, Minnesota, at the Federal
After he only
Medical
spent
Center.
1 year in prison for all the things he's
Hmm.
done in his life. And when he went to prison, he was like in a coma most of the time. He started drifting in and out of consciousness. He doesn't even he barely remembers his time in prison. He
Yeah,
was that sick. So when
exactly.
he went in, it was like he was going to go into a nursing home probably anyway. So instead he just went into prison. He didn't even lose anything when you think about it. Uh, he was never punished for any of his crimes, except maybe by God and AIDS. But
Mm,
but
yeah.
and that's if you believe in God. So but
Yeah,
that's
yeah, sure. But yeah, what's interesting, what really started this, we had Chris Favo, but it ended up being another Colombo guy, Carmine Sessa. He was the consigliere. He would pled guilty. So basically, he had became an informant, and he started tipping off prosecutors about Scarpa's unusual relationship with DeVecchio, because Carmine's the one that was saying, "Hey, Scarpa was talking about someone that was the girlfriend that was giving him all this confidential information," and so um,
so the
you could.
prosecutor messes up. They put their whole trial. They put their whole trial based on one witness. Explain what happened there.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is that um, you had so so you had back in '97, you had Jerry Capisi had conducted an interview with Linda Shiro.
Okay, and explain who Linda Shiro is.
Yeah, and so Linda Shiro was wife of Greg Scarpa.
Okay, and
Senior.
Linda Sherrill is who they based as the main witness. It's basically the only really strong witness to the case. They based the case on her words.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. So, and what happened was in '97. So again, let's get the time frame correct. So in fall of 2007, the trial was already going on. So DeVecchio was actually charged back in 2006. He had already been retired since 1996, so he'd been retired for 10 years, and so now the trial was actually going pretty good, and now it's the fall of 2007, and so uh, they bring up Linda Shiro. So Shiro back in '97 in with Capisi had denied that DeVecchio had been involved in the murders. And so she said something in '97, but then in 2007 it was different. And so part of it too was Shiro was had been promised that none of the information would be attributed to her, but Capisi and another guy, Tom Robbins of the Village Voice, said, "Hey, DeVecchio's facing life in prison, and so any promises that have been made to Shiro, that just has to be, we just can't go with it now because it's the stakes are too high." And so this ended up causing the prosecutors to move for a dismissal of the
They
charges.
so pretty much you have a man here that is guilty, but
Yeah.
you do such a horrible job in prosecuting him.
Yes.
You have a horrible witness that you did not do any background check on. Something as simple as checking to see whether she has a previous interview somewhere, they did not
Hmm.
do. So
Right.
they put every egg in that basket.
They
And
put
this,
every egg in that basket.
and this man walks away.
Hmm.
He's still alive to this day, and
Still
he's an
alive.
old man now.
Hmm.
Uh, but he retired a hero.
Yeah.
He didn't lose anything.
He
Kept his
didn't lose his retirement, his benefit, none of that stuff.
and it's just goes to show you. I mean, Scarpa, as evil and as bad as he was, had this luck on his side. Even when he got AIDS, I mean, the guy lived 8 years.
Hmm.
When they tried to gun him down, he was right in their sights.
Hmm.
They came up on him. Two masked gunmen got out. They walked up on him. They were, he was that close.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think about this whole thing? When you hear this story about this guy, and when you hear about the feds, uh, and this guy literally, after he was found, they dropped the charges. They asked him what his personal opinion of Scarpa was, and he said that he was a real gangster. He was a tough guy. Even after he walked out of that courtroom, he was still praising Scarpa. And Scarpa was dead by this time, 10 years dead, and he's still praising him 10 years later after the trial the same day.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's just disgusting that our government would do that. And the truth is that 99% of the agents of the FBI are great people. They love our country. They want to protect us from evil. But when you have people like DeVecchio, I mean, and I understand you have to get information, it's very hard to get it from the mafia, or did back then. So you either have to have a confidential informant, and which I understand, or you have to go like Donnie Brasco, where you actually go inside with a wire, and that's dangerous. So I understand you have to do stuff to get information, but you have to put boundaries in place, and that's a problem. And then I feel like you have to have some sort of like a checks and balances. So you can't just have one person that has is able to go in and meet with him. Yeah, and the thing is that DeVecchio was able to go in there and not have anything recorded. He didn't he if someone came with him to see Scarpa, they would sit on the couch. He would turn up the television, and then he would go in the kitchen with Scarpa, and they would talk. So all that information was done without being on wire, and it was just a recipe for abuse.
And I want to correct one thing. Before, when I said that he was in hiding, I meant Persico was in hiding, not Scarpa, during the
Yeah,
murder.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
First
it's
coat.
just so people, because I realize that it may sound like,
Oh, it might have been confusing. Yeah.
yeah, it's not Scarpa in hiding. It's Persico that was in hiding at that time, and that's the main reason he wanted the girl killed.
Right, right, exactly. And then, and there's a lot of other stuff that we didn't even cover. Even like his son, for example. I mean, they were involved in him and about 9 other Colombos were involved in a drug trade, and there were indictments coming, and so Greg Scarpa Sr. found out about it and told his son. And of all the 10 people, it was only his son was able to escape and leave.
And
And
so he also ran out of the house after he had, and this is one of the reasons he went back to prison. He had a bracelet on, and he got
mhm.
into a gunfight and he got his eye shot out.
Yeah,
Explain
yeah.
what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, there was some problems with him and his. So there was some people, drug dealers, that were giving his son problems, and his son comes home, tells his dad what's happening, and his father's ticked off, and he's going to go out and take care of it, and he ends up getting shot in the eye.
Okay, and I want to go over one other thing to give you an idea what kind of man this was. This is his daughter wrote a book, and there was a couple stories. One, this is confirmation, and I just want you. I just want to tell you this part. And Cheryl reveals how her gangster father would take savage revenge on anybody who interfered with her, including one on a boy who dared to kiss her on the doorstep. Uh, a particularly haunted memory dates back to 1983 when 14-year-old little Linda was assaulted by Jose Guzman, and this guy's body was found dead, a
Hmm.
driver who was taking her to school. Guzman pulled over the car before tearing the buttons off the schoolgirl's shirt and licking her hand. Thinking quickly, she avoided further abuse by telling her attacker she would meet him after school instead. She called her mother from school in a flood of tears. Of course, Big Linda told Scarpa, who found out where Guzman lived, marched to his home armed with a cane. After charming Guzman into a walk-in with him to the park, Scarpa's gang pounced and carried out a violent attack and left the driver with a broken nose, wrist, and ribs. So that's pretty bad how they left him, right?
Yeah.
But listen to what happened. Scarpa himself beat Guzman so viciously he broke his cane. But here's the finish. Weeks later, Guzman was gunned down in broad daylight by Scarpa's oldest son, Greg. No one was ever charged with the killing.
Mm.
Can you imagine that this guy that's in the car makes the mistake of trying to molest Scarpa's daughter?
Oh my God, yeah, that's not something that you want to do. And I mean, this guy, I mean, Scarpa's no one to play with, and so one thing I wanted to finish on this story about when Scarpa got shot in the eye. These were two Lucchese mobsters that he went after. So it was Michael DeRosa and Ronald Moran. And so Moran is the one that actually fired back and hit Scarpa in the eye. And so that's where we got the story of Scarpa getting some Scotch whiskey, pouring it on his
And he
wounds.
killed one of them in the fight, right? During the gunfight.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I know he killed somebody in that gunfight, but
Yeah.
you know, not only did he get his eye shot out, he basically made the biggest mistake
Yeah.
of uh, he violated his
Yeah.
probation.
Yeah, DeRosa was one that got shot, and then but Moran was one that had shot Scarpa in the eye. So just really crazy story.
And the daughter talks about this guy was a violent murderer, but he came home, he was a good father and everything. But I don't know what to say after you reading about a guy like this, and for 40 years he stays out of prison because he's connected to the feds.
Hmm.
I guess we can call him probably the biggest mob rat that ever lived.
Yeah, I would say that, and then his son actually got out of prison a couple of years ago as part of compassionate release in 2020.
And there
So
were rumors about his son ratting, but I'm not really too in tune to that. His son's a different story and a different video in itself. That's why we didn't really bring his son into this video. This was more about the father. But the son
yeah, and we
himself, his
right.
son himself had a very interesting life as a gangster too.
Yeah, there was some stuff, and we're looking into it. I mean, there was some stuff that because the son was there at um there where the in Colorado at Supermax, and supposedly there was some information about some of the what do you call them those Middle Eastern terrorists or something. So there's some stuff that supposedly he was able to give some information. So, like I said, that'll be a story of its own. But the son was a pretty bad person as well.
And it says here too, uh, authorities believe Scarpa wasn't telling his underlings the truth. That DeVecchio, who has denied helping the mob, had outed the woman as an informant. And this is part of this article. And these are all articles 10 years later after his death. I mean, this article is from 2006. I mean, so this is several years after his death before the trial. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's strange about it. Yeah, so I mean, he dies and 94, I believe, something like that. And he ends up so basically nothing really happens to Scarpa, and then you got the guy that's DeVecchio, he retires in 96, and then 10 years later they have the trial. But yeah, if it wasn't for what if I mean, the feds messed up that case on DeVecchio. I mean, DeVecchio should be in prison right now, but they screwed up that case bad.
and this is just like Whitey Bulger when he had his handler that was corrupt.
Hmm.
They both start,
Connolly, I believe,
yeah,
or whatever.
they
Yeah.
both started worshiping the guy that they were supposed to be getting information from as an informant. They started worshiping these guys. I'm
Yeah.
looking up to them. I mean, it's something that this guy, the Vecchia, he just seen in Scarpa like being the ultimate gangster. That's what he called him. He called him a macho man. But he wasn't he was a madman killer. His nickname was the Grim Reaper.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I just see that a lot. I mean, I even, it's, I'll say there's no evidence of any wrongdoing by the feds on this. But, when I hear people talk about some of the feds that handled Sammy Gravano, for example, sometimes it starts to make me cringe because it's almost like a little bit of hero worship that these guys do. And it's
It
just
is. Yeah,
the
you got these
feds ain't
guys.
one.
They're going through college and stuff. They come from good families, and all of a sudden they're brought into the sleazy side of another world they know nothing of, except what
Mhm.
they learn in Fed school. They,
Yeah.
then
Yeah,
you
it
hear,
is kind of exciting though. I mean,
sure,
I've never been in that life, but I hear these stories and stuff, and talk to people. We talk to people that are in the life and or were in the life, and it is exciting, but you have to put those boundaries in place, especially if you're going to be a
and I think
FBI agent.
it must be hard to put those when you got it's like same thing when you think about Donnie Brasco,
Hmm.
Joe Stone, same thing. He started worshiping these gangsters. He started looking up to them. I guess
Hmm.
when you're around them and you come from a different side of the street, you know, it's just it's that simple.
Well, I think too, a lot of it is that these guys, Scarpa, for example, and they can be charming people in their own way, and people can get, I guess what I call they just get um, off guard. They're not on guard anymore, and then they end up through time over and over. They start to kind of go to the dark side. I don't know if DeVecchio had always planned on doing that. I don't think
I think he was just being hustled by a hustler.
that's the point. Yep, the
These guys are
hustler.
street hustlers. These guys eat these guys up alive in the street.
Yeah.
These are guys that they learn stuff from the FBI. They learn the typical textbook stuff.
Oh yeah.
And Scarpa is like this hardcore street guy. It wasn't easy for
Yeah,
him,
he's Machiavellian. Everything's Machiavellian with him, and pro quid pro. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. But yeah, I would agree that I don't think there's any mobster informant that's worse than at least with Italian mafia as Greg Scarpa Sr.
Yeah, we're thinking about we did a story on Casso. He's probably Casso and him are right there, but Scarpa was more he was much more clever, it seems, than Casso was.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but it just shows you though these relationships they allow people to get away with murders and all that. So you sometimes wonder, who was really worse, or the ones that they put away, or the actual informants. That's
Yeah.
a big question.
Okay, my man, please subscribe to this channel if you have not. Hit the like button, the reminder bell. We'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. And James, thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
anything you like to say anything before we leave?
No, just hope everyone has a great Independence Day, as we said earlier, and we've got more good stuff coming.
Okay, you take care, my man.
All right,
Bye.
take care. Bye.